Hello, my name is Paul. I'm from Wilson Partners. I'm here with Alice and Amie. We three are associate directors in the accounts and business services team, and we're here to talk to you about business advisory. So guys, tell me a little bit about how you got into business advisory. Alice, should we start with you?
Yeah. So for me, it kind of started sitting down with clients to talk through their kind of year-end accounts, making sure they understood the numbers, knew what debtor was, creditor was. And then from there, those conversations developed being more around what the business goals were, what the challenges the business was facing at the time. And then from there, it kind of led into more kind of formal advisory to dig into those challenges and the goals of the business more.
Nice. Amie?
So I started my career in audit, and as part of that, I had a number of conversations with the business owners about the future of the business, their budgets, forecasting, events that had happened since, what their growth plans were. And that was part that really interested me. So moved over teams, and since then have been working with a number of clients and loving it. So yeah, that's me.
Cool.
What about you, Paul?
So my journey is slightly different to you guys. I joined the business as a trainee about 5 years ago in this team as it was back then. And really, to begin with, my role was very much kind of behind the scenes, not necessarily as client facing as it is now, doing a lot of management accounts, a lot of VAT return prep, statutory accounts, that kind of thing. And over time, I just, people took me under their wing, really. Senior people in the business took me along to meetings. You got more heavily involved on the advisory front and just really got a buzz for it, really, and found it really rewarding. So yeah, that's me. So tell me a little bit about what you like about business advisory.
So for me, it's twofold. It's the instant gratification, having asked the right questions to a client, seeing that light bulb moment about how we can add value to the business and what their goals are. And then it's the longer term element, so seeing those goals come into fruition as the business is growing with you as their advisors.
Nice.
Yeah, for me, it's really similar. I think that the first point you said around the instant gratification is kind of what gets you to begin with. It's the buzz of seeing the cogs turning in the client's mind and seeing them kind of reconfigure whatever the issue or challenge is that you've been discussing. That's the kind of initial buzz in the meeting, and then that like longer term bit of almost the pride of seeing the business achieve the goals that it wants to achieve and seeing it grow and develop and form into the business that it wants it to be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's definitely one of the most rewarding bits of it. You know, you put all the time in at the beginning, really early stages, right through to the first couple of years, whatever that might look like. And then, you know, the client reaches their objective. You feel like you've been part of that journey and provided loads of value. Yeah, that's huge for me. I really love that side of it.
Yeah.
Partnering them and seeing the vision come alive. It's really rewarding.
Yeah, definitely being a part of it and building the relationship with the clients.
Let's talk a little bit about the client's first step on their advisory journey. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think it's different for each client, and a client starts that journey at different stages. Often it can be that they've come to us with a challenge or a problem that they're facing, or it can be that they actually are doing really well but want to make sure that growth is happening in a structured way and that it's thought out. I think for us, it's the key bit is sitting down with the client and really working out what their long-term plan is to begin with and what that advisory journey then needs to look like, because sometimes it can just be as simple as starting with a succession plan, or it can be sitting down and having a strategy day with the client to actually work out what their long-term goals are, because they don't know.
And then where you go from there also depends whether or not the client wants you to be a part of their regular board meetings as kind of like a non-exec, or if you just want to catch up quarterly and help hold them accountable to the goals that you might have set to help them reach their ultimate goal. But as Alice said, it's very dependent on the business and the part where they get us to join in on their journey. Because if they're a startup, for example, which we have a few clients like that, we might be focusing on different areas of the business as opposed to if we're in a more mature business who are looking to sell in the next 2 or 3 years. So yeah, it really depends on the client.
So would it be fair to say that they don't necessarily need to be addressing a specific problem to get involved?
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. They might be coming to us because they want to retain their staff and think about ways to incentivize them. It might be, as Alice said, making sure that their growth is going to be sustainable, not just a one-off boom year. And, you know, it's getting into the crux of how that's happened, how we can sustain it. Is their pricing right? Is the gross profit margin correct? Like, how we can help with that.
Yeah. I think it's almost the key is that they've got to a point where they've thought, I need an external advisor. I need someone that's independent from the business that can kind of step away and have a, kind of independent, unbiased view. It's really tricky for business owners where they're wearing lots of different hats. They're in the weeds, they're in the day-to-day, and actually a lot of what we're doing is facilitating pulling them out of the weeds and kind of stepping back and looking at the business objectively to,
Help make a plan.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time we find that the business owners aren't always necessarily on the same page. So actually facilitating those conversations and making sure that they're aligned in their goals, or if they're not aligned, why aren't they aligned? That's a key thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so that could be the point that they've come to us, is because there's several business owners and none of them are on the same page.
Yeah. But it is interesting how many people don't realise they're on the same page until we get in the room together.
Yeah, a lot of it can be just deciphering the communication internally, which is where we come back to that light bulb moment of it's almost reconfiguring not reconfiguring the client's brains, because that's what a claim.
Lofty goals.
But it's that clarity piece of making sure each of the business owners understands each other, understands their own kind of thought process and their own goals and their own
direction.
How do you see it as journeys starting for your clients? Or when people approach you?
Like I mentioned, I don't think it's necessarily all about recognising that there's a problem and then looking to address that problem. It's about goals. It's about having a team around you that you might not necessarily have within the business presently. So small businesses, for example, we work with quite a few of those. SMEs is our bread and butter, really. And they won't necessarily have a big board of people that have these different people in different roles, like a financial director, ops director, that kind of thing. So we kind of come into the business as advisors and put on different hats throughout the course of our engagement with the client and provide value in different ways. And I think it's all about, I think you've already mentioned, Amie, giving them direction and understanding what their goals are, how they're going to get there, formalising plans, that kind of thing.
I think that's a really important part, actually. It's not just about the numbers for us. Although we're led by them and guided by them, a lot of it is around strategy of the business, and we end up talking about things that you might not expect typical accountants to get involved in. Because we're leading from experiences we've had with similar industries or other businesses, because we've been able to have that exposure to it, which they might not have if they've only had that business.
Yeah, I actually think that's a massive misconception about what we do really as advisors. You assume you're getting your accountant in to come and have a conversation with you monthly, quarterly, what have you, and clients think they're my accountants, they have a handle on the numbers, that's all they're going to offer, really, insight into that.
Whereas, they care about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is a large part of it, don't get me wrong. As you said, I think a lot of the things that we're talking about do follow the numbers, but we're using them to facilitate conversations, and we're not just going to be sat in front of a P&L talking about, what's happened over the last 3 months or what have you. There's way more to it than that.
It's more what the numbers mean.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of numerical, analytical approach is what we're bringing to the table. So we're not just talking through the P&L, but looking at what the P&L means. Has it highlighted that there's a challenge or a problem? And
it tells a story.
It tells the story, and then that's the kicking off point. So that's where we then, but it doesn't stop at the numbers and doesn't stop at what the numbers means. It's then moving forward as to, okay, so the numbers have addressed a problem or maybe highlighted that there's something that needs to be looked at. But the next part of the journey is
The future.
not
just looking back on the numbers.
or how is that problem going to be fixed? Have you thought about it? Were you aware it was a problem? And kind of making sure you're challenging the client as to how has it got to that point, or how can we get away from that point?
Yeah. Or what's next? Like, how can we help you grow? What do you need to invest in to get to the next step? And do we have the funds available to do so?
So what other misconceptions have you guys found about advisory?
I think one of the main ones is that business owners think we're there to make the decisions for them, whereas actually we're there just to challenge, question, facilitate conversations and help hold them accountable. And it's not just the owners of the business that should be held accountable. It should be that they're filtering down that accountability to other members of staff to help them grow and also take things off their plate so that they have more time to run the business, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I don't know about you guys, but I often find that when we're going in and speaking to businesses who are fairly young, or maybe it's one director, it's usually their baby. They've built it from the ground up, perhaps put some money into it, and it's difficult for them to let go. Part of our role as advisors, I think, and where we can add real value is to kind of help them develop that mindset that it's not just them. We're here to help. They've also got a team who are probably quite capable and they can delegate things to, which frees them up to focus on the things that are actually going to move the dial in terms of the business's growth, whether that's revenue or something else. What do you guys find challenging about being advisors?
I think it's when you have that accountability piece and you go to the next meeting and actually what you have agreed would be actioned in between hasn't happened. And I think that's the hard bit, because it's, why hasn't that happened? Is it because it's not actually a priority? Was what we discussed last time not the key component of us needing to be here to discuss? And find that challenging, because we can see the potential of what we'd agreed the plans to be, and then we've kind of taken a back step. But I also think that's kind of important to address with clients as to why hasn't that happened, and if that isn't a priority, then what do we need to be talking about that is. So it's a challenge, but it also helps facilitate bigger conversations around what the importances are.
Yeah, because if they haven't actioned what was agreed, that's often a really big sign that there's a whole another issue going on. And so it can be frustrating because it feels like you're not like progressing as fast as the client wants to progress, but actually it can be really crucial in identifying that issue and then being able to develop a plan for it together.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's clear sometimes that they're focusing on the wrong things and maybe prioritising things that they're comfortable with, that they're good at, that aren't necessarily the right thing for the business.
The easy wins.
Yeah, exactly. Easy wins. And I do think easy wins are important, don't get me wrong, but if we're talking about long-term objectives, what's going to push the business forward, grow it, help them reach their objectives, maybe towards an exit, for example, they might be a bit uncomfortable about challenging themselves almost, and doing the things that are that bit harder and take them out of their comfort zone.
Yeah, and you can understand focusing on the easy wins, can't you? It's nice to have that like quick gratification. But I guess that is a real crucial part of our role, isn't it? Is helping them to focus on what is the priority and why it's the priority, and challenging them why they're focusing their time on the easy wins.
I think that is also part of why it is sometimes challenging with advisory, because clients want to see the long-term goals, but because there's no actual output that's happening immediately, it's difficult for them to see that that's going to be successful, that it needs time to grow and flourish.
Yeah, I think that can all, coming back to that concept of what's a common misconception, is that we are just going to come in, wave the magic wand, fix all the problems. And whilst we are definitely there to like facilitate and kind of partner with them through that, actually a lot of the hard work has to come from the individuals, from the business owners. And then again, coming back to that delegation piece, like getting the buy-in from their team, getting their team to help facilitate some of the action points.
And having an open mind to other areas of the business that might need work done that potentially they don't necessarily want to prioritise, but actually it might be that they need to be able to get to where they want to be.
Yeah.
So there are sometimes difficult conversations like that, but
yeah, there's a lot of difficult conversations because
that is a challenge in itself, I think, for us.
Yeah, and again, you can understand why it's the business owner's baby. Like, of course they're going to feel protective over their business, and it can be really difficult when you're coming in to kind of highlight or kind of filter through some of the problems and identify and highlight them, and they're going to feel protective because it's their baby. But it's
easier said than done, but I think sometimes it's really important to take the emotion out of it, and you've really got to put your kind of commercial hat on. What's right for the business? What's the impact of this going to be in terms of the financials, meeting their objectives, that kind of thing. And that's hard sometimes because, you know, no one really wants to have difficult conversations, but it's part and parcel of the role.
It's the whole point of us, isn't it? Is that we are external and we're outside of the business, so we're there to pull,
challenge.
and to take the emotion out of it.
So let's say a client comes to you, they've never had any experience with business advisory before. What does the journey for them look like? What's the process?
Yeah, I think for me, the kicking off point is a strategy day. So having a session where the business owners or the leaders of the business are stepping away from the day-to-day, so they've got the headspace to really think about what their vision for the business is. What does it look like in a 3 to 5 year time frame? Time frame can kind of adapt depending on the individuals in the business, but really having that time to nail down what the direction should be with the idea of what the end vision should look like.
So we're talking quite high level things rather than getting really stuck into the nitty gritty early doors.
Yeah, real big picture.
And as part of that, I guess it's the steps towards how we can get them there over that period of time that's been agreed, and what the priorities of that vision are and how to get there.
Yeah, so once we've kind of had the strategy day, agreed the vision, all of the owners, leaders of the business are on the same page as to the goal and the direction that the business is going in. Okay, so now how is that going to happen? How are we going to facilitate it on a more regular basis? So is that monthly board meetings, monthly kind of recap sessions? Is it quarterly? What does that frequency look like? And how are those business owners going to be held account for delivering that vision? What does the individual projects look like? Do they need us to sit down and help them to kind of flesh out those projects and really put in a plan as to how they're going to be delivered?
Let's go back to that initial session quickly, the strategy day. Who ideally should be involved in that? Should it just be the main director, or is it a group of people?
It should be the leaders of the business, essentially. Those who are the decision makers and those who are involved in the future of the business. And they come together to determine what it is that they want from the future of the business. It doesn't necessarily have to just be directors. It could be people that they want coming up through to be a director, so that they feel involved in what the forward-looking vision of the future of the business is.
So they're buying into, you get different perspectives.
Yeah,
sounds useful.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really depends on the individual business, and I think that's a real big part of our approach to advisory is we adapt it to the business. So sometimes that is just having just the business owners or just the directors in that initial strategy day session. Sometimes it is having other people involved. It really depends on the business and those individuals involved in the business as to what the expected journey is going to be. Because ultimately, if there's an individual that's going to have huge influence on the business and further down the line, there's a lot of value to bringing them in at the start.
So we've had our strategy day. We know what our vision is. We've got all the right people in the room. What's the next bit? Where do we go from there?
So essentially it's working out how regularly we want to have touch points with the client, or the client wants us to have touch points with them, essentially, which could be monthly, quarterly. But the more regular they are, the more we can hold them accountable, the more that we can talk through the change of what's happened since the last time we met. Because although we're saying we're going to discuss the vision that's going to happen in 3 to 5 years, you know, we're only human, things do change. Like it could be that the industry's changing, the market's changed, what they decide they want to be the future of the business has changed, and we need to be able to move the strategy with them so that we can help facilitate the growth to get to the end goal, even if the bits before it look different to what we first anticipated.
So we've spoken a bit about the vision, that we're trying to cover off in our initial strategy session. How do we get to that vision?
That's a really good question. So within the strategy day, we would be looking to kind of bring it down into separate pillars as a way of forming that vision. So that can often be, again, we would be looking to adapt it for the business, but typically we'd be looking at finance, obviously, because that is our numbers, but we look at such a bigger picture than just the finance. That's just a fraction of the day. We would then look at people, operations, sales, marketing, technology. How much time goes onto each of those different pillars is really dependent on the business, and what we look at within each of those sections depends on the business. Within those individual factors or sections, we would start to break down each individual project that we would be looking to put, that the business would be looking to put into place to facilitate the end goal. Some of those projects can be quite chunky, and by chunky I mean in terms of time, energy, headspace, people, resources, and so they really need to be well thought out as to how they're actually going to happen.
So it's part of that session understanding who's going to take ownership of the different projects, when they're going to happen, what the priority order is, essentially.
Yeah, that's a real crucial part of it. So normally it is a bit of a brain dump. We just want to get all the ideas out, make sure that everything that the business owners are thinking about is down on the page or on the wall, whatever environment we're in, but getting the ideas flowing, getting the creative juices, I guess, of the business owners going as to what's important, what projects need to be looked at. Then the next step is that prioritization bit. What happens in the next year? What happens in 2 years? What happens in 3 years? And then the accountability. So who's going to own each of these projects? And you can't have one, if there's 3 business owners, you can't have one business owner like saying they're going to do all of it. The reality is that's not going to happen. So again, that's where we really come in terms of the challenge aspect is, does it make sense for Mr. X to be in charge of every project, or do we need to spread it out? Who has the best skill sets for each one?
I think it's also important to note that some of the targets we have in, say, a specific area, if it's people or HR, for example, they need more time to pad out what actually that looks like. And it might be that we touch upon something really important in that meeting, but actually it's a bigger conversation to happen at a later point when we've determined when's the best place for that to take place, who's the best person to have assigned essentially to making sure that comes to fruition.
So again, we're taking a step back, focusing on high level stuff, keeping it quite broad, what's relevant to the vision. We're not deep diving into the details.
Yeah, and that's really important, is pulling them out of the details. Sometimes clients can get quite focused on individuals within the business, whereas actually we need to be thinking bigger picture. It's less who's the individual in the business, but what's the roles that's needed in the business, what does the structure look like. It can also be, if we're looking at systems, less, well, what do we have now, but what do we need, what needs to happen from the system over. So it's kind of the end goal, I'm going to say vision again, but what do we want it to look like over what is it now? And that can be a challenge for us to try and get clients to do, because everyone knows what they're doing now. So the temptation is to focus on the now, the reality, whereas what we're looking to facilitate is pulling them out, looking at the bigger picture, looking at what they want it to be over what it is.
And the conversations that come after that are also really important. So it might be that we've determined a priority in the next year of 3 items. The next time we meet, we'll then go into more detail as to how we can actually get to the point that we've achieved those things, which leads us further towards the vision.
Yeah, but there might even be an extra step between the strategy day and the regular accountability catch-ups or regular advisory catch-ups, which could be sitting down with the client, business owner, whoever is going to be the leader for the project, and really fleshing out the project, working out if it is fully a good, just because on the strategy day you think the project needs to happen, doesn't necessarily mean you've thought the whole project out. So sometimes the next step after the strategy day is sitting down, focus on the project that you've decided is the priority, and really working out how it's going to be facilitated, what the challenges might be, what could happen immediately, what could not happen. Do you need some funding in place before the project can happen? Do you need to do particular hires before the project can happen, or do you already have resources within the team?
So what does success look like?
Success can look like different things to different individuals depending on what it is that they want out of the advisory sessions. So what I mean by that is it could be we have an owner of a business who actually just wants to make sure their time in the business is better spent elsewhere, whether it's with family, picking their kids up from school and having that tangible thing where they're spending less time with the business, or it could be that they want to make sure that they're getting the maximum value for their business, preparing for sale. So it really depends on the individual.
I think that's a real good summary in terms of like what success can look like for the client. I think it's a really good way of then leading on to what does success mean for us as the business advisor. For me, I think it's getting the feedback from the client that they've got more headspace, they're not waking up in the middle of the night worried about the direction of the business, they're spending the evening with their children if that's what's important to them. So I think for us it's being able to measure that success as well. So if we're looking at the client having more time with their children, is that happening? Are they working less hours in the business or working more effectively within the business, focusing their time on what they should be doing?
And I feel like those smaller successes on the way to the vision should be celebrated and noted and included on the meetings that we have.
Yeah, I agree.
Small changes can have big impact over time, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Why are you laughing at me?
I'm sorry. Oh, God.
Do you think that the numbers can come into it as well? Obviously, we've spoken about how different clients have different objectives, different businesses have different objectives and where they want to get to. But I think a lot of the time, don't get me wrong, it's key to focus on things that are less financial. For instance, getting better sleep at night, spending more time with the family. But if your objective is purely to make the business as valuable as it possibly can be, then one thing you're probably going to have to look at is EBITDA, multiples, revenue generation, all kinds of things. And that's probably going to be tracked through looking at your monthly figures, looking at that bottom line. Have we gone in the right direction? What do you guys think about that? Is that important?
Yeah, definitely. I think it comes back to that question of what's success for the client. So I think we would tailor our approach based on if that was what was crucial to the business. And then it can be a case of helping them to understand the numbers and the incremental changes they can make to the numbers to get that number bigger. If that's their main focus, we can look at how the numbers could be tweaked and how small changes can have a big impact.
And also how to track them, like via KPIs, if we're looking at that on a monthly basis or quarterly or year on year. But we do also have to address the other sides of the business rather than just financial to get to the end point of the figures that they want. So we need to look at people, we need to look at whether they need to forward hire, which does impact the financials, but it's also another part of the business. So the advisory piece, although if you want to focus only on financial, does hit other areas of the business because they're all as important as each other.
Yeah, it's all
absolutely.
moving pieces, isn't it? So and that's again where we come in, because it's looking at how all those moving pieces fit together and helping clients to understand it.
Yeah.
I think the mention of KPIs and EBITDA is really important, because actually sometimes the first step is just that the client doesn't even know what that is.
Yeah,
they
so
don't know
true.
what KPIs are, why are they important, and again that can be where we get involved at the initial bit, is literally why do you need KPIs, what kind of KPIs are
What's a KPI?
So KPI is a key performance indicator. So it's a way of making those goals have a measure. But quite often, or sometimes if it's a founding business or a startup, they've never considered what those measures should be, why they're important, why they should be in the business. And that can be a real value that we bring, is sitting down, putting those measures in place, putting the KPIs in place, and getting the buy-in from the business owners to kind of reach those goals and reach those measured goals.
I think while it's hugely important to focus on all areas of the business, and different areas are going to be more important for different businesses, having a really good financial base to begin with, I think, is also quite crucial, because we're going to be making, or the client is going to be making, quite a lot of decisions off the back of the meetings that we're having with them in order to progress the business. If we're making those decisions off the back of rubbish financial information, then, you know, what's it all for? Like, take recruitment, for example, that you just mentioned. If they really need this key hire, and that key hire is going to be a pretty substantial investment for the business, they might not have an understanding initially of whether the business can actually afford that, or what things need to be in place to make sure that that hire is going to be a success.
Yeah, and that understanding can often be what does lead to the sleepless nights. And so actually being able to facilitate that understanding and making sure that the client is making the decision with all the information and they fully understand the decision they're making is what leads to that measure of success for us, that the client said, I can sleep at night again, which is like the ultimate words to hear. Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's when you really know you've made an impact on someone's life, really. So, and that's the yes moment for us, or for me at least.
Yeah, definitely. I think as a philosophy, or as a business, our philosophy, it's not just about statutory requirements. We're going to do a set of accounts every year for you. It's about that lifestyle, you know, helping the clients get to where they want to go on a personal level, as well as the business.
Yeah. But it's empowering business owners to make informed decisions, isn't it?
Yeah. What kind of size businesses does this work for?
So I know we've touched upon owner-managed businesses, but it can also be growing large companies who need advisory sessions because they don't necessarily have the makeup of that board in place at the time. So we kind of act as like a non-executive director that's not there on a permanent basis. And as part of that process...
Yeah, I think that's where that we come in, is because of our accessibility. So you don't need to commit to a full board of 10 full-time. We can kind of come in and
put different hats on.
Yeah, put that hat on.
So in answer to your question, it can be any size business that has a need or an ambition to grow and needs some guidance and questioning and being held accountable to help them reach those goals, essentially.
So if I'm a business owner, I'm thinking about advisory. Maybe I've decided already that it's something that I need, my business needs. Why would I introduce you guys to the business than going out and hiring someone external?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is, and the value that we bring is that we can be flexible, we're accessible. So instead of having to go down that resourcing of hiring a full-time person, making sure there's a contract in place, making sure you've done your due diligence in the hiring and then being committed to that person, we can often be in place a lot quicker. We can be flexible in terms of frequency, so we can really grow with the business. So if you start off only needing someone once a quarter, we can do that, and then as you grow, typically you would need more support, and then we can adapt our support to your needs, which is a lot harder to do with a hired full-time non-exec.
Yeah, I think that clients really value our experience as well. The experience that we bring to the table, because naturally as accountants and business advisors, we're going to have exposure to all different types of businesses with all sorts of different problems on a day-to-day basis. So that really gives you a great platform to advise them well using your knowledge and experience.
I also think it's that accessibility piece. So we have access to specialist resources. So whether it's a tax innovation specialist, we can go away and get specific advice and come back with that, whereas someone who is a full-time resource may not have had that exposure and have that accessibility to specific specialist advice.
Yeah, so we're the client-facing side there. We're who they see. But behind us, we've got a team of highly experienced people who can just dive in and out as and when they're needed. That's what we're saying, right?
As well as the experience that we bring.
Yeah, absolutely.
The key part.
Yeah. I think exit readiness is something worth touching on as well, because obviously we're going through the process with the client right from the very beginning, that strategy day piece, regular advisory meetings potentially. What's the end goal? For a lot of businesses, that will be an exit. And one of the great things, one of our strengths, I think, as a firm, is that we have a corporate finance team who specialise in mergers and acquisitions, so they can be part of that process as well. Towards the end, we can bring in that knowledge and experience, and I think that's hugely valuable to the client.
Definitely, it's nice to see that we can take them through from the initial start of their journey, whether that's a startup or if they've come in as a more mature business, through to their end vision and actually see that part through too.
Yeah, and bringing that advice in at the right time, I think is really crucial.
Amie, Alice, good chat today. Thanks for your time. I think we've covered a lot of really good stuff. We've spoken about the beginning of the journey, that strategy day piece, how we can add value to the client on an ongoing basis, and then exit planning as well. If anyone has any questions about anything we've spoken about, or if there's just anything that's interested you specifically, feel free to get in touch with us. We'd love to have a conversation with you.